Director of the JCRC, Community Relations Council. We're a committee of the Jewish Federation of San Antonio. I just want to take one moment, and today is September 11th. So I'd just like to take a moment of silence to think about those who lost their lives in that terrorist attack. May their memories be a blessing. I want to tell you a little bit about the JCRC. We're a committee made up of members of all of the congregations and Jewish groups in San Antonio. We like to do a lot of outreach programming and as well as public affairs and outreach to our public officials. And upcoming, we have on October 2nd, right here in the auditorium, we have a candidate forum for the Bexar County judge candidacy, and it's a really big position. They have the judges have about a $3 billion budget. If you're not aware of how powerful that position is, it's like the mayor of the county. So we want to join here and hear from those candidates. And then in December 2nd, we're doing an outreach event asking those in our Jewish community to invite members or friends of the non-Jewish community, maybe neighbors or friends of your kids or colleagues of yours, to your home for Shabbat. We started this program last year, and it's a way to help stamp out anti-Semitism by sharing a little bit of what it means to be Jewish and what Shabbat is, and welcoming people into our homes. And then on December 18th, we have our Catholic and Jewish Hanukkah event, which is a big outreach event to the Catholic community. We've been doing it for over 20 years. It's a lovely luncheon, and we hope some of you might be able to come, invite friends of Jewish and Catholic faith to break bread together to celebrate Hanukkah. You'll be able to find out more about these events if you follow the Jewish Federation on social media or jfsatx.org/JCRC. We'll be posting those events as they come. I want to introduce Nina Lopez. Nina is the chair of the JCRC, and Nina, take it away. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon. I want to thank the Epstein for putting this together. As she said, I am the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council, and I want to briefly tell you about the group that brought you here. The Hispanic Jewish Connection is a group that is part of the Jewish Community Relations Council of the San Antonio Jewish Federation. The group is committed to promoting the Hispanic Jewish community, its cultural awareness, history, and traditions. We aim to support and encourage cultural initiatives to develop future programs and partnerships that advance and promote a deeper understanding and celebration of the Hispanic Jewish community. We will do this by creating a welcoming space to share our stories and culture with all Jews in San Antonio and feel pride in our diversity with programming that will highlight stories from Mexico, Central, and South America. We will also connect with other Hispanic groups in San Antonio and present to them the diversity of our Jewish community. Now I want to briefly introduce our speaker for this afternoon. Herb Canales was born in Corpus Christi and divides his time between Corpus and San Antonio. His interest in history began in his early years visiting the Alamo and hearing the stories that his grandfather told him about the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire. Herb earned a BA in government at the University of Texas and an MS at the School of Library Service at Columbia University in New York, and earned a graduate level certificate in public history from Texas State University. Herb was employed by the city of Corpus Christi in its public library system, where he served as director for nearly 27 years and implemented new technology, oversaw the construction of new branches, and fundraising. He also served on the Texas Book Festival Advisory Committee created by First Lady Laura Bush. Herb's interest in Sephardic history began in graduate school in New York, where he met a librarian who is now at the American Jewish University in Los Angeles, who introduced him to the story of the Sephardic Jew. Herb has a personal collection of over 200 books and articles on the subject, and focuses on the Jews of New Spain, now Mexico, with particular attention on the northeastern area, Monterrey and Nuevo, where its founders and earliest settlers include crypto Jews who fled the Inquisition. Herb's ancestors were among those settlers. Oh, you're welcome, Herb Canales.
Yeah, this is a personal hobby of mine. Can you hear now? Better? Okay, sorry. This has been a personal hobby of mine for the last 40 plus years. There's a lot of material out here I've collected. As I mentioned, I have like 200 books and articles. 3/4 of those would be from Spain, where all of it started, obviously. And there's one book I have here by Seymour Liebman. He was writing early on this, lamenting the fact that there wasn't that much written about Mexico. There's not documentation, that's been the problem, unless they're inquisitional records. That's when you learn stuff. And he actually wrote the book. And there's been many more that have come out since then. My goal today is to show that the Jewish people were in the Americas very early on and contributed to its settlement and development as early as the 16th century. And my talk today focuses on this area. These are the 4 modern states of Mexico near us. That pretty much covers the territory when I start talking about Carvajal, Luis de Carvajal. That's his area that he was appointed to in 1579. And so, like I said, the books that I have are mainly Spain. About 1/4 of those have to do with Mexico, and just like a handful in the northeastern area, because it was a secret society. And so there's not that much information. And so what did all start in 1492? What do we remember? Grade school, 1492. Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, and that's pretty much all we were taught. But obviously something more serious was going on at the time as well, and that was the expulsion of the Jews. The Inquisition had started in 1478, and they were talked to by Torquemada, Tomas Torquemada, what a name, right? The Grand Inquisitor, to expel the Jews, either get baptized or be exiled. If you stick around, your property is going to be confiscated, we'll execute you. That's pretty much the bottom line of what happened. There's no real good number about how many fled. Obviously, there was no official count. A lot of them obviously went to the Ottoman lands, which is now Turkey, Greece, North Africa, Holland, Italy, yes, France as well. But people don't realize that a lot of them, in a clandestine way, came to the Americas and what is now Mexico. New Spain, or España, colonial Mexico. A lot of them were on the surface conversos, which meant they had been made Christian, but in secret they practiced their religion at great risk when they came here, because Jews were not allowed in, Portuguese were not allowed in. Conversos, they were recent, they were new Christians, they were not allowed in. But that didn't really stick. There were people that were getting in. So converso is a word that, use it interchangeably with crypto Jews, because you could be a converso and a crypto Jew at the same time, right? And so with the expulsion, not knowing how many people, because the numbers vary depending on what you're reading, how many people fled. They think about 50 or 60,000 initially went from Spain after the edict, the so-called Alhambra decree by the Catholic monarchs in 1492. Maybe about 50 or 60,000 made it into Portugal. And the term, when you read any of these history books, the term that they use is Portuguese is synonymous with Jewish. That's where they came from. It was easier to get out of there through the Canary Islands and into the Americas. And here's where they settled. And why the Americas? Some will write romantically, well, it was still Spanish land, and that's what they were used to. I mean, the Jews arrived in what is now Iberia in Spain 2,000 years ago. And some will submit that even before that, they were already traveling through North Africa into Spain. And so another writer will tell you, well, they were seeking opportunity. There were mines here. There were silver and gold mines here. And some of those people, with their testimony with Inquisition, they were basically saying, yes, we came here to make some money, and then we'll go to Holland, or we're accepted. So there's that story as well. And many got through, and that whole rule about, 3 generations back, you have to be an old Christian. There was an official by the name of Gonzalo de Salazar, right? That he was an official very early on in New Spain, right after the conquest. He was first generation Christian. His parents were Jews. His father was a physician to the Catholic monarchs in Coronado. And so, but he made it in, so they made some exception. His daughter, you've heard the name Oñate from New Mexico, the Conquistador, the conqueror of New Mexico. His statue was just brought down in New Mexico. Juan de Oñate was the one who went in around 1600 New Mexico, the conqueror of New Mexico. Anyway, his father was Cristobal de Oñate. They were Basques, but the wife was the daughter of Gonzalo de Salazar, the one that I just mentioned. So Oñate was Jewish heritage, and that all shows up. You look at the people that settled New Mexico; they're very passionate about their Judaism, and in fact, there's a 1610 history right after Oñate had gone into New Mexico. And it says, what they're saying there in that history is that there were too many people with the Oñate expedition who were of the forbidden people, which we know what that means. And the people that were forbidden were the Sephardic Jews to come to the world. So there's that. Early on, they were arriving. I mean, there was a bishop in what is Puerto Rico now in 1506 saying that the passengers on the boats that were arriving, they were mostly Hebrews. And another bishop in what is now Cuba was saying basically the same thing. You have boatloads of people that are new Christians or Jews. None of that was allowed, but they were managing to get through. And so that's again synonymous. They were Portuguese, synonymous with the word Jewish. This guy right here, I read the book. I just got this book from Bogota, Colombia. Juan Fried, that was not his original name, he's a Ukrainian Jew. And about 100 years ago, about a century ago, he studied at the London School of Economics, joined an export-import business in London. They sent him to Bogota. He was in that business, but he became a historian. And his interest was mainly the indigenous people of Colombia. But he also wrote about the passengers who had come over to the New World. And this is beyond the scope of this talk today, but basically what he was saying is that there was a lot of clandestine migration to the New World, to the Americas. Just looking at that passenger list, the number of people that were on ships and so forth, people that would sign up as crew members, boats that would come that would never return, the crew members never return. So that's how people were able to get in. Because even somebody was commenting in a story in the 1550s in Mexico City, they were saying, well, at that time there were more Jews than Catholics. I don't know if that's true, but there were a lot of Jewish people in the New World, and that's the point. I'm going to move it over one. It has no particular bearing on this particular talk, but I spoke in June in Philadelphia at the annual association of the Association of Jewish Libraries. There's your historical marker. What year does that say? 1780s, somewhere in there during the revolutionary period. Quite a remarkable contribution. But the Jews in the Americas, what is now Mexico, predate that by more than 200 years. So, yes? Oh, yes, right here. Juan Free. Yeah, it's not one of my slides. That's fine. Anyway, so, keep that in mind that they were already here. Next one, please. The first Jew in 1521 in the North American continent, Hernando Alonso. Tragic story. That's from my own record on Ancestry. So I have a direct relationship to. He was the husband of 12th great aunt. Yeah, that's my relationship to this guy. From 1521, he was the first. He was with Hernan Cortés, the conquest of the Aztec Empire. Okay, and a lot of those people, you're rewarded after victory. He was given a lot of land. He also became a cattle bearer. He was, handling the meat business for the colony, and he was burned at the stake for being Jewish in 1520. Okay, they caught up with him, and so I don't think his wife is Jewish, and I think somebody said, well, he won't let his wife go to mass on Sunday. Things like that, and they killed him. Anyway, so we're going to go to the next slide. I just want to insert something here real quick. We know the story of Francisco Coronado, right? The 7 cities of gold, 1540s. His wife was Beatriz Estrada, and that connection is going back to Spain. Her great grandfather was one Men Gutierrez, and his wife was Catalina. It was right after the Inquisition got started. She comes from these people, and they were tried after their death in 1485, because the Inquisition was already organized. And they discovered they had been Jews, so they exhumed their body and burned their remains. Yeah, that's what was happening, right? And so there's that story, and those ancestors, their descendants are there. I mean, they were in the New World. These are the people that I'm talking about. But part of this is about, we don't tell the full story of history. Like 1492 was just Columbus, who could have been Jewish himself. Anyway, so the next one. Luis de Carvajal de la Cueva. Have you heard the story of this man? Some of you have? Okay. Very famous. That's a photo I took in Monterrey last year. His name was Luis de Carvajal, but when he got his contract with the King of Spain, they added de la Cueva because there were other Luis de Carvajals. And so anyway, the book, the next one. This book right here by Samuel Temkin. If you are interested at all in this story, this is the book to read. And you can still get it from your public library if you can check it out. But it's also available on Amazon. Professor Temkin, was originally from Mexico City. He was a professor of engineering, I think even aerospace engineering at Rutgers. He's now retired. You can catch some of his lectures on YouTube. Real good book. And so just a quick story on Carvajal. He was born in Portugal, although he lied to the Inquisition, said he was born in Spain. He was born in Portugal in 1537. The family was conversos. I think they were crypto Jews. As I said earlier, as many as 50,000 fled into Portugal. They were originally Spanish, but they lived in Portugal. It was back and forth depending on the severity of the laws at any given point in time. And as a boy, he was a page in Benavente at the home in Spain, at the home of a Count of Benavente. So there he learned Spanish, which he needed, because he was going to be dealing with the Spanish court when he was getting his appointment. So he needed to learn that Spanish, probably without an accent, because that was a dead giveaway. He was Portuguese. He became an accountant in Cape Verde Islands. He was a very ambitious young man. Later, he worked with his father-in-law in Sevilla. His wife was Jewish. His family was Jewish. She never joined him in the New World, in New Spain. He traveled through the Canary Islands. We don't know how he got through because of the limpieza de sangre, the blood purity laws. You had to prove you were an old Christian. And we're not sure how he was able to do that, because he wasn't. And anyway, he eventually settled in Tampico, Mexico. You know where that is? It's about 6 hours south of the border. And he helped capture English pirates, Hawkins, I believe, near Tampico. So he was doing the work of the empire, and that caught their attention. And he sought a higher appointment. Okay, is there one before that? Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, he sought a higher appointment. I think we'll go to the next one. That's it. That's the slide. You saw the earlier slide about the 4 states of northern Mexico. This was the land that he was given. It's a remarkable achievement that he got this from the King of Spain. They wanted that area settled. It's part of the reason why he was able to get it. And he appointed him the first governor of the new province of Nuevo de León. That publication, that map is from the Jewish Publication Society. It looks like the northern part is where San Antonio is, right? You kind of look that way. But Temkin says it was closer to Dallas. Okay, and it's interesting because we don't know this next point, how he was able to achieve this. This is an official settlement on the part of the king. It's not, you can get away from clandestine votes and lie about your background. You're dealing directly with the king and his people. He was able to convince them in the official documentation, the official contract is what I call it, not to ask the passengers that he was going to bring over anything about limpieza de sangre, blood purity. They were not going to be asked if they were old Christians. And first of all, you have to ask the question, well, why did he want that to begin with? Because he had a plan. He was going to bring over crypto Jews is what he was going to do. But there would have been no reason otherwise to not ask that question. And so that map right there tells you, because it's not exact. And when he finally settled in the area that I showed you, he started to make enemies because it was not a survey. And there were some towns that were actually named in the contract and others that weren't. And he got there and somebody said, no, this is mine. And there was battles over the terms of the contract. And that's what made enemies, because he was stepping on other people's turf as they saw it. But he had the contract from the king, right? So they go to whatever they call Valencia, the court that they had up there, and he would always win because he had that document. Nobody was going to challenge him on it. But he's still making enemies, and they were looking where they could hang on him. But anyway, so the next slide, when we get to this book, famous book by Eugenio del Hoyo from Monterrey, this is where we get to what's the makeup of the passengers on those boats coming over in 1580 to the New World, to Tampico. Well, according to this historian, as many as 60% were probably crypto Jews. Could be more than that, because we have to go back to that. Why are they not asking that question? And the other thing to keep in mind about that, and a point that's often missed when you read the history of that, is that the Inquisition in Portugal started in about 1536. Their focus initially were the larger cities and the cities on the coast. In the late 1570s and the early 1580s, then they started moving into these villages in northern Portugal, where he came from and all the people that he knew came from, his family and so forth, the people that he brought over. So the point being is that he was there to save them. We don't have any documentation that will ever say that, but he was there to save them. And that's why they needed no questions asked, because that was his plan. And you can see how it played out in a few minutes. The next slide. That's a document that was signed by the king. You see Albay at the top of there. That's another contract where he's authorizing Carvajal to raise livestock. So that had to be planned for a big operation. Because Why would you need a king signature? Do you want to just do cows? You needed it because it was planned to be a big operation. So was he like Hernando Alonso? Also, we don't have documentation. Was he also like a cattle baron? That had a lot of bearing because that's closer to Texas, and the cattle industry would develop later, free roaming cattle. And so anyway, he got that. I had to translate it. It's impossible to. And so next slide. I don't know if you've heard about this. About 5 years ago, Luis de Carvajal had a nephew, Luis de Carvajal Hermoso, the younger, and that's where things started to happen, because he was keeping a book. He was Jewish. He relapsed, keeping a book on his prayers and his observations and so forth. That was stolen from the archives of Mexico City decades ago. And 5 years ago, this gentleman, Leonard Milberg, bought, he didn't know what it was at the time, at an auction in New York City. Not for a high price, because they didn't even know either what it was. And it turned out to be that was a diary that had been stolen like 80 years ago. And so you can find it, you can download it from Princeton University online, free. He had it digitized. It went back to Mexico City. Well, I'm hoping it's still there. And so, you know, the point is the enemies that he made, right? And so he, a member of his family, basically, all in here, spoke to another member of the family, and she just admitted everything about his family, you know, that they were Jews. And so the enemies that he had, now they had something on him. And so he was arrested, he died in prison, and they never accused him of being Jewish. They accused him and they convicted him on the fact that he didn't denounce his family, his sister, the nephew with the book, and the other siblings. And they were executed in 1596 in Mexico City. And other children that were younger were executed later. Okay, so the next one, that's me, grandpa's. Diego de Montemayor, founder of Monterrey, 1496. Alberto de Canto, who was do Canto because he was originally Portuguese from the Azores. Founder of Saltillo in 1577. Probably crypto Jews. Again, you're not going to find documentation. And the other thing, well, one more thing about Carvajal. He was never accused of not being Catholic, but what's interesting is when they asked people, what people would they have been asking? The people in the northern part of the map. Those are people that were his part of the clan. So no, they were not going to say, oh no, these Jews are. Right? Anyway, next one. Well, that's Lucas Garcia, also founder of Monterrey, also from crypto-Jewish roots. All of these people were, you're not going to find a document that says that. A small group of people. 1626 census from Monterrey, probably less than 200 people altogether. And so a very small group of people, and they all intermarried. They married their cousins several times over. So it was a small group. That's for security. Okay. This is an important one. Has to do with the Garza family. You're not going to be able to read it. 1526 Inquisition, Canary Islands. In there it has you have Marcos Alonso de la Garza, and his sister Constanza de la Garza. Those names, yes. That's your ancestor? Okay. Us too. And so that's, anyway, he was burned at the stake. He was from Lepe, Huelva, Andalusia, Spain. He was burned at the stake. And his sister would have been too, except she died in custody. It's too much for her, probably. That's an important name because we all heard the name Garza, right? It's very, very prominent. Not in Spain. There may be a few there, but it's not a common name like it is in Texas and in northeastern Mexico. You want to move over to the next? That book right there. That's the one that my friend Aldo is doing. He's flipping this. Aldo, you want to stand? He's originally from Mexico City. He's getting his citizenship in Spain based on that name. The process that they set up to, we're sorry our ancestors did this, and you know, we're going to make it up to you. You can show us that you're descendant from these people. You could become a citizen of Spain. I think they stopped it, but he's still in the pipeline, and it's based on the Garza name. In that book, you will see that the Garzas from where he was from were in trouble with the Inquisition. The siblings fled. He came to the New World and ended up with a large family in Monterrey, right? And so that's how you got it. And others are getting it as well. So anybody with the name Garza going way back, that's part of that family. And so if you want to move on over, that's kind of a mess, but that's like my Garza family tree. So I come like from four of the brothers of the original Hernando Alonso, and one of them like 3 times. I don't. It means that I'm related to myself. Okay, so but that's not unusual. That's just an example. Others can do the same thing. They were a small clan. They intermarried. And you look at the next one. That's the opposite book. I have it up here. There are people who are using to trace their ancestry, and that's what's helping them get in that citizenship. Next one. Monterrey, if you look north of there, you see San Nicolas de los Garza. The Garzas were major landowners. That's why it's called de los Garza. They owned a lot of land. And that still has that name. This is from Corpus Christi, a direct descendant, Blas de la Garza, Maria de la Garza Falcon. He's the one who had the first Spanish ranch in Texas around Corpus Christi in 1766. And he's probably the one that named the Bay of Corpus Christi back in 1766. So the natives were telling that the English were in the areas of Spain went out to track them down. Anyway, so that's one of the books that I have here. Unfortunately, it's out of print, and you find it online, like what, $1,500 or something, because it serves for people that are in the process for citizenship. The genealogies buy these books. The booksellers raise their prices because they're going to charge their clients anyway when they produce, right? They charge you, right? Anyway, so here we go. Next one. That one's also out of print. Santos, Richard Santos, unfortunately, is no longer with us. He was from San Antonio. You can probably check it out or read it at the San Antonio Public Library. It's got a lot of names in there of all the crypto Jews in Nuevo León and and all those places. Very, very good book. Next one. This is from a museum. It's kind of hard for you. Can somebody see? Can you see the first few lines? It's in Spanish. Can you see? Spanish is English, right? Yeah.
With the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem by the Roman Empire at the beginning of the Christian era, many Jews emigrated to the Iberian Peninsula.
That's a museum about an hour and a half northwest of Monterrey. And what they're doing there is they're acknowledging their Sephardic history in a very prominent way, in Spanish, of course. And that's important. Next one. That's the book I recommend you read that from the broader perspective on the Jews in Mexico, colonial Mexico, New Spain, whatever you want to call it. Very good background information. He was the one that was published in 1970. He was the one that was lamenting the fact earlier on that nothing had been written. It's very hard to find information. And so I know they had it at the public library. I found it, I bought it many years ago and paid your basic $20. I'm not going to pay $1,500 for these things. That's what people are asking for these booksellers, but they're smart, right? No, yeah, Seymour Lehman. Seymour Lehman. Okay. Next one. That's another book that was very helpful to me. He passed away. He was a professor at the University of Miami, talking a long time ago. Passed away, I think like maybe 40 years ago. He did a lot of research in the archives of Mexico and produced this index of the documents. There are a lot of documents there. They're difficult to read. Unfortunately, some have been stolen. Some are in libraries in the United States, like the Huntington in California, and I think Berkeley, and some are in private hands, which we'll probably never see. But he was indexing the records in Mexico. So it's very, very handy. It helped me find some information. Okay, next one. You hear about the Sephardic Jews and their return to Judaism in New Mexico. It's basically Stanley Horridge or Horridus. I'm not sure about the pronunciation of the last name. It was like I said, don't criticize somebody for mispronouncing something that means they read, right? That's the only way they found that name. But anyway, that's an excellent book on New Mexico. And like I said, they're very passionate about their religion and what they've done. Next one. If you want to know more about what they're doing in New Mexico, you can see this online at no cost. It's the story of New Mexico Sephardic Jews. Really a very inspiring story. And I would recommend write it down and look for it. Yeah, it's easy to access. Next one. One of the ones, a retired rabbi, Stephen Leónand from El Paso, works with the people, has gone into Mexico as well, and he appears in that documentary several times. Very good. Next one. There he is again. And from that book, next one, I learned about this documentary. I finally found it. It was produced like a PBS documentary from Israel in 1992, which was the 500th anniversary of the expulsion, of course, Columbus too, right? And so this is an exceptional documentary. It's hosted by Itzhak Nabon. I guess he was the 5th president of Israel. He's wandering about Spain, several episodes, and the old Jewish communities and what the history was of those areas. It's fascinating. It's not available anymore commercially. And so somebody helped me out on that. I was trying to get them, I didn't get a really good response from Israel about them reissuing this because it's an important story. Now, some libraries have them. I don't know if you can check them out. I don't know about San Antonio, but I finally found this in. It was on, I remember it was on eBay or one of those, and it was the only one, and it was new, shrink wrap still. And so I bought it, and it's really quite good. I would recommend finding that, or maybe finding it and broadcasting it here. I don't know what the copyright restrictions would be, but it would be really worth people seeing that. The next one, when I do get to Spain, I was going to go 2 years ago, but the pandemic shut everything down. And this is a wonderful book I have. It was also very difficult to find about the Jewish ruins in Spain. We needed an equivalent one for Portugal. But this man, I think he's deceased. It needs updating because there's been so many more revelations since that came out. But he's traveling around Spain and viewing the ruins, the old, the Jewish communities that existed hundreds of years. It's a fascinating book. That would be the guide for me to take. I need to photocopy it so I can highlight it. I don't touch the books otherwise. So that I recommend that. It's like my future, what I call guidebook. Next one. Now this one is really interesting. Somebody mentioned Canales here earlier. Still here? Yeah, she's right there. Can you all read the Spanish? Do we need to translate it? You want to read it out loud? It's hard for me to turn around.
Process and criminal case against Esperanza Rodriguez, mulata, natural of Sevilla, widow of Juan Bautista del Bosque, origin.
German. Yeah.
For an observance of the lay of Moises.
Yeah, she was observing the law of Moses. You know what that means, right? Okay. This is the 1640s. They started rounding up Jewish suspects or crypto-Jewish suspects in Mexico at the time in the 1640s, because from 1580 to 1640, Portugal had been annexed by Spain. They broke away again in, I guess it was, 1640. And of course, Portuguese being synonymous with Jewish, they went after the Jews in Mexico City because they figured they were behind that. And so she was one of the ones that was captured. Now, in her testimony, I made this point before, the stories that we get where you actually have real stories, real information, they come from testimony from the Inquisition. Otherwise, you don't know about this. They didn't exist. That was their whole point. They didn't want to exist, like the ones in the northern reaches that we talked about. It was all secretive. And so she was rounded up. The testimony of her mother was African. Her father was a converso, a Jewish man from Sevilla. They never came over here. She did with her husband. But you do see that they do the things that they're supposed to do. They got married in Havana, at a Catholic church in 1607. Their children were married in Catholic churches and were baptized in Catholic churches, but that's not what they were practicing. They admitted, in testimony to the Inquisition, that they were practicing Jews. And she was convicted, as were 3 of her daughters. She had 2 sons. I'll tell you about that in just a minute. That they did not, they didn't get executed because they promised not to do it again. And they were to be returned to Spain. That's what happened. They didn't want them in the New World because they figured you could hide, you could run away, you could convince others to do the same thing, right? And so we cannot find, I found a record where they were convicted to be returned to Spain, but there's no information about them after that. They fled. And so you want to get to the next? It's another book by Richard Santos. The term auto de fe or auto da fe, which in Portuguese, literally means act of faith. So where they executed people was considered an act of faith. And so you want to move the slides over? Those are 2 of her daughters. The next one, the other daughter. Okay, there's also another document, another book that's been published. We want to move to the next one. I'm going to say this because there's a book that's coming out on this gentleman, Hernando Alonso. Prominent figure, should be written about more in Texas history, as well as the whole story that we're telling here. And one of my political things is because Carvajal had so much of what is Texas that he was governor of Nuevo León, that he should be officially considered the first governor of Texas. And so this guy, you see a slide, you want to move it to the next one? There I am. This is in Saltillo. This is the archives, the state archives in Saltillo. Gentleman over here, Lucas Martinez. He's writing a book on Hernando Alonso. I hope it's published soon. He won't tell me when. The story is we're lacking a little bit of information. It's very difficult. That we are pretty sure that Esperanza Rodriguez was his mother. Okay, so there you have it for Texas history. He's the one that came in 1675, pretty close to San Antonio, recommended that missions be established this side of the Rio Grande, which they were in 1718, starting with what became the Alamo. And so is he officially the father of San Antonio as a result of that? That's my term. But think about that in terms of Texas history. The full story, you always need to tell the full story. That the man who basically is responsible for the missions which started the city of San Antonio to be established was this man who was half African and half Jewish. He never used his mother's name. That's very unusual in Spanish tradition in Mexico. You use your mother's name at the end of your father's name. All the stuff you find on him, it's absent. Probably because he was, he came up to Saltillo, he got away from Mexico City, which is where all the bad stuff was happening. And so that's a little bit, we're lacking something. Because she admitted she had a son named Juan, but his name is Fernando. But I found a document at the archives in Saltillo, Mexico. He's starting a process. He's taking on his father-in-law. I don't know if it's inheritance or something. But 1666, he's identified as opening up a petition. And this is Juan del Bosque. And then a few months later, it's now 1667. And it's the continuation of that, but now Hernando del Bosque. So it's probably Juan Hernando del Bosque, if it was. And so that could very well be who the man was it? Was not a common name, del Bosque you do see now in Saudi. Okay. Descendants of these people. Remember, it's all the same families. They really are. You can see it in these books. That's a publication of the Texas General Land Office on the Spanish land grants that were awarded at South Texas on the border. That's what these relate to. Whenever we were, see those elongated strips, Starr County, Cameron County, present Texas counties. Those were awarded starting in the mid 1700s, 1750s, and so forth. Those land grants were 6, 7, 8,000 acres. And it was farming. The actual settlements were across the river in what is now Mexico. Pierre, Camargo, Reynosa. Those cities. They're little towns. Laredo, of course, is bigger. But anyway, so the point is, they started the ranching tradition there. You know, we know about the King Ranch, the famous King Ranch in South Texas, and the wrote about that, Giant, and the Kennedy Ranch and so forth. Those traditions came from here. They came from here. A lot of goddesses in those land grants. My own family, like 5 of them. A lot of goddesses in those land grants. So these are the people who were awarded this, who started developing the traditions. What became the Texas cattle industry. They're picking up free roaming cattle probably from the time of Carvajal. They started those traditions. So that's part of the story. And that's where, I have a problem with the way Texas history is taught, because none of this is really taught. I mean, I think it's better for a child to be challenged intellectually with a much broader story, a much more complex story for the way they're taught. And so that's part of the reason why I do this. There's a bigger story here. And in this case, the Jewish, contributions to what we have now in Texas, and nobody knows. They really don't. And so, if anybody wants on my email to communicate with me, I also have cards. Go to the next one. A new book, I haven't read it yet, but I understand it's very good. The historical novel. And so that's, I'm okay. Go ahead. The next one. There you recognize this guy. Very good. The next, pay close attention to this one, because this is inspiring. Next one. This is an old recording. Yeah, you need to capture an image of this so you can get to it. I want to say late 60s. Oh my goodness. Late 60s. He's speaking somewhere. And it's not a very good recording. It's like 45 minutes, and the first few minutes he's just having conversations before he gets started. I heard it like this with my phone. It's not a very good, but it's very inspiring because he's talking about his trip that he went to Zaragoza, Spain, post World War II. And what he's talking about in that recording is how important Spain and Zaragoza was, the Jewish history. You have to listen to that recording. It's it will take no more than 40 minutes to get there. Quite good. And so there's the link right there. Anybody can lift their phone and make a copy of it and listen to it. He meets, of all places, he meets a gentleman at the cathedral in Zaragoza. It turns out, I don't want to get it all the way. It turns out that man had current day Spaniard ancestry, and they end up in Israel. So anyway, it's a very important story. Next one. Very famous Mexican historian, Vito Alessio Robles, a century ago, said that. Okay, but there was pushback from the people in Monterrey, so he kind of backed up a little bit, right? But he meant what he said. I mean, this guy was a master in terms of history, wrote a 3-volume 7-fold reland in Texas. Because at one point they were administratively, combined. Texas. Anyway, so, but when he said that, okay, Monterrey today is the metropolitan area is over 5 million. Okay, when he said that 150,000, the character of Monterrey, of course, has changed in the last century. It became an industrialized city from its early development. And again, I submit to you that it was the Sephardic Jews who started that settlement back, almost 5 centuries ago. And so a lot of people came from other parts of Mexico. It's in jobs, industry. But it was a very small town at that point. And so, yes, he's famous for having said. There would be something here real quick. Okay. In terms of what happened with people from Carvajal, remember they came in 1580. Probably most of them were crypto Jews. Why else ask for? Don't ask us about what our background is. We don't have time for that. Anyway, so let me try to read this real quick from Temkin. Let me just do this one. Eugenio del Hoyo, that I showed you earlier in the book in Spanish, he said something very similar. Now this is Temkin, right? This guy did a lot of research in the archives. He's going to have the most knowledge, and you're probably not going to find. There's not going to be anything else that surfaces after that. It's the most comprehensive writer. So what happened to these people? Part of what happened was that when Carvajal was executed, there was fear in Nuevo León, right? And Diego de Montemoreo, who you saw there, fled, came back later. Carvajal's deputy, Gaspar Castaño de Sosa, illegally took, without a priest, he took 160, 170 people, and about 1590, it was down to Mexico. Before Oñate, he was 10 years later. And he got arrested, they all were all brought back, because you can't do that without authority from the viceroy. Can't do it. And so, but the thought is that they were fleeing. They were fleeing because they heard what had happened to the Carvajal family in Mexico City. They wanted to get out. And so he was, poor man, he was convicted. He was sent to the Philippines, which was a Spanish possession, and he died there. The others that were with him, they came back. A lot of them went to Monterrey. A lot of them later joined the Oñate expedition to Mexico. That's where you hear about these people that wrote his book on New Mexico. It's the same people. These were all Jews, and it makes absolute sense that they were getting out because of what had just happened. And even if they were doing illegal things, they didn't succeed. He crossed into the Pecos River, which is in Texas. He's probably the first Jew in Texas. That is, it got Carvajal, when he was a governor, didn't make it across, it just didn't get it. Anyway, so reading this real quick statement here from Temkin, what happened to these people? It is likely that most of them remained in the vast territories that were then part of Nuevo León. In some of those places, they and those who later joined him continued the work that Carvajal had started, founding other settlements and growing in number while preserving many customs, words, traditions, and favorite foods. Even today, in spite of the considerable influx of people, that I was talking about earlier, from other parts of modern Mexico, some of these customs and traditions are still noticeable. And even though Spanish is the language used in Northeast Mexico, as well as the language still used by many who live in the American Southwest, there is little doubt that a good number of them descended from people who long ago were born in Portugal. Again, Portuguese being synonymous with Jewish. These people were from Portugal. That's my talk. Yes. celebrate. Yeah, I don't put a lot of different names. They say that if it's a Z in Gonzalez or it's a, S in Gonzalez, it means something different. I haven't really researched that. I mean, there are websites that say these names are Jewish, but only if you can link to a person with that surname, in my view, who was, can you say for sure that they were. Like Rodriguez, is the one that you hear commonly. So I don't know that I can specifically answer you and say yes for sure. Anybody with that was definitely. Any? Yes, sir. Yeah, no, there's the Cantus were settlers in this area as well. Basically, anybody who was, in my view, without documentation, which will never be found, because they were clannish and they were secret. Why would they be anything other than that? If you hear about, let me say just one side note here. The cases about the Inquisition, they're in Mexico City. There were a lot of Spanish Jews in Mexico City. They're the ones that got in trouble because people would report on them being tortured. You don't hear, except the Carvajales, but they were in Mexico City also. His sister and family had moved there. You don't hear of cases from the area that I showed you that we're discussing. You don't really hear cases from there. And that's the reason why they were there. Because they were on the other side of the mountain range. They were far from the central government of Mexico City. They were far from the office of the Inquisition. And they pretty much escaped all that and they intermarried. So does that help with your question? The Cantus, yes. Yeah, what I'm basically saying, anybody that was there very early on, again, without documentation, probably. Because I mean, that was the reason why they weren't going to be asked what their background was. Because they were going to be living in that area and they had to intermarry because those are the only people that they trusted. Otherwise, they die. That's what's happening. So yeah, the Cantus, Benavides, Sosa, there are lots of names. These books, I only focus on a few names here. This book by Richard Santos, right here. Look at all the bookmarks that I put on there. They're all in here. Okay? That's the same thing with it's appropriately titled The Conquistadores and Crypto Jews of Monterrey by Dr. David Rafael. Okay? The same concept. They're all, and you'll hear, we think they were crypto Jew. No doubt they were. You're just not going to find a document where they actually admit that.
I want to thank Herb Canales for joining us this afternoon. And we want to thank you guys for being here with us. We have seen he's left us his email with questions.
Yeah, I have cards here.
And now that we've got your emails, we're gonna forward some information on our next event. And we want to thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you.
I can talk about this one. This is. Let me show you this book. I don't have a slide on it.